Kill Team has no shortage of rules interactions, concepts upon concepts layered so thick that some have found that this little skirmish game can run as long, if not longer, than its bigger sibling in Motion. This series has gone over many elements of the 2.0 version of Kill Team, and if you haven't already dove into all the other videos, definitely take a look. Today we're going to take a look at all the common abilities you will find among the weapons and war gear used by almost every operative across all the teams. There are some that are more team specific. You'll have to find out about those in any of the team overviews we've done, or through the Furnace of Combat. Before we get into it, if you're new to the channel and are into tabletop gaming, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, maybe the like if you're up to it. As well, we have a link to our community Discord in the comments below. Join up if you're looking to show off some of your work, continue the conversation, or just hang out among other tabletop fans. So let's take a look at the common rules and abilities you may come across in Kill Team. Starting at the top with APX, the big shooting special rule. Going up against elites, hopefully you have a few of these. APX stands for armor penetration. The X at the end is a stand-in for a number. That number represents how many defense dice the defending player must remove from their total defense dice pool before rolling. Shooting a simple intercessor will normally allow for 3 defense dice looking for a 3-up to be successful. Reducing this total tends to ensure some damage. An AP2 plasma reducing them to just 1 chance to save is rough. And these weapons tend to also come with the higher end damage weapons in Kill Team can have, from crack grenades to plasma to melta and everything in between. Look out for these weapons. They make units strong offensively, but they tend to also put a big bullseye over their head for enemies looking to free up some pressure. Quick reminder, in the rare situation where a unit might have access to multiple APX rules, they do not stack. Barrage is a rare one, but it changes how a unit can determine if it is in cover. Normal line of sight rules apply, so this won't override conceal orders in cover, but when resolving the attacks, the opponent's retained defense from cover can only occur if the area over top of them has terrain. Against lower armor value units that rely on guaranteed saves, this can be devastating, but again, this is a very rare rule. Balance can be found on melee and ranged weapons. Simply put, it allows the attacker to reroll 1 dice. Key thing here is that this dice doesn't really need to be a fail. There are times when re-rolling to fish for a different outcome might be good. Weapons with a low hit requirement, like a 3 or a 2, with benefits like Rending or Lethal 5, which we'll go over in a second, could find it advantageous to try and get a crit out of a roll. And normally this re-roll would require 1 command point, so it's a very high value basic built-in function. Never forget though that a re-rolled dice cannot be re-rolled again. Re-roll responsibly. Blast, the arch nemesis of horde teams in close quarters. Mechanically, Blast acts like any other shooting. A target is chosen, dice are rolled, effects are applied. After the initial volley of dice, Blast triggers. There is usually a measurement after the Blast rule. The distance is measured from the unit's base edge to determine what other operatives will take a volley of attack dice. These subsequent attacks are treated as separate attacks, so full rolls and rules are applied to the local targets. Key thing with Blast is that for a nearby target to be valid, it must be visible to the initial target, so no catching enemies through the wall with this. A further benefit comes from treating these local enemies as unable to be in cover. The Blast rule doesn't progress to these nearby units, however. Only the original target can serve as the epicenter for this damage. It may be good form to ask which enemy units have these rules, as well as the distance they come with. It could give you a better understanding on which side of the kill zone you should probably spread out, especially in close quarters games, where this rule also confers Lethal 5. Side note, weapons with blast profiles can't be used in Overwatch, but if the weapon has 2 attack profiles, one with blast and one without, you can use the non-blast profile instead. It's also probably worth noting that blast will also affect allied units as well. Try to keep your operatives clear from your own blast attacks. Brutal is found on melee weapons. Units with this benefit can only have their attack dice parried by critical dice, even their normal hits. This might seem interesting, but it can at times be problematic, especially in situations where the Brutal operative might want to force the opponent to try and parry to live, so they can maintain melee for a round. Brutal weapons tend to come with high damage though, so they're usually worthwhile in general. Ceaseless is the middle child of the reroll rules. Where Balanced allows for 1 dice, Ceaseless can cause many dice to reroll. In particular, dice of a similar roll. For instance, this Rubric Marine rolled 2 hits with 2 fails. Fortunately, the 2 fails are both 1s. The attacking player can choose 1s to be rerolled for the action, allowing both to possibly become hits. Like Balanced, these dice don't need to be fails, so in similar situations of fishing for crits, it could be viable to reroll normal hits. Fusillade is strange. There are many rapid-fire weapons that have it, but it rarely gets used. The core of Fusillade is that the attacker can split the shots between multiple targets that are within 2 inches of the original target. The Reaper Chain Cannon can take its 6 dice and split them into multiple Harlequins over there. 3 in total near the original target, but unlike Blast, this actually cuts down on total dice per unit, meaning the units will have a higher chance of saving through the damage. Rolls for the attacks are made after all dice allocation is complete, so you won't know the dice rolls until after splitting. Fusillade, as I said, is strange. It almost feels like a trick, like it serves more as a buff for your opponent who can try and trick you into using it. There may be rare instances where using it might work, but for the most part, you almost don't need to worry about it. Heavy serves as a limitation for units carrying weapons with this special rule. If you wish to fire with the weapon, the unit must not have normal moved, fallen back, or charged in the same activation. Note that dash is still available to the unit, allowing them to pop around a corner and unleash hellfire on their enemies. Also, this limitation is only for the activation. You can move and dash a unit into cover while engaged and potentially fire off some Overwatch later on, either normally or using the close quarters guard attack. The burden most plasma weapons carry, hot. There are others as well, but where there is overcharged plasma, there is a chance at self-incapacitation. When attacking with a weapon that has this in the profile, discarding rolls of 1 will trigger 3 mortal wounds on the operative firing. Re-rolling occurs before the discard, so you would be able to try and avoid such damage. As well, if a unit burns itself out, the rest of the attacks will still trigger. Incapacitated operatives are removed at the end of the full shoot action, so rolling 3 crits and a 1 with an overcharged plasma in the hands of a near-dead unit might result in 2 operatives being pulled. Are you tired of units sitting in cover and conceal without any downside? Indirect. Normally, grenades carry this rule, but there are some other weapons making the rounds with it. Simply put, when determining if a target is valid, weapons like this avoid enemies being considered in cover, but only for the targeting step. Oddly, it seems that a unit could still get a cover save from an incoming grenade, although if it has blast, any nearby operatives won't get the same benefit. In close quarters, these weapons are also limited to 3-inch range, but they may choose to not use the indirect rule for their action to get their normal distance. In maps where teams will be playing KG on points, try and keep track of your opponent's indirect options. As well, you can use your own to create areas of high danger for the squishier stealth teams. Notice, however, that this prevents cover in line of sight. Obscuring will still prevent weapon use. Invulnerable Save. These tend to be unit specific and come with a value afterwards. The Harlequins have an invulnerable of 4+, as well as a 6+ normal. When rolling to save against shooting attacks, you may choose which of the 2 save options you'll take. All your defense dice must be of this one type, no splitting between normal and invulnerable. For Harlequins, you pretty much always use this. For everyone else, that tends to have a worse invulnerable than their normal. In situations where attacks will reduce defense dice, the invulnerable will prevent the dice loss. This can be stacked well with retainable dice, like from cover, while still giving the unit a chance to mitigate more damage than it normally could. Just know for models with a 6+ save, either invulnerable or normal, retaining that from cover doesn't equate to a critical save. Saves retained from cover can only be considered normal at a baseline. Some abilities can upgrade this, but the initial dice will always be normal. Lethal changes the required dice roll that is considered a critical. Very powerful. Commonly, this takes the form of Lethal 5+, allowing dice rolls of 5 or 6 to be considered crits. But I have seen Lethal 4+, and I've heard tales of even lower dice requirements from things like the Hand of the Archon or the Elysidian Starstriders. Many times, these rolls will be tied to other critical effects like stun or P1. We'll get to those in a bit. Definitely pay attention to operatives that have this on their loadout, as they tend to be core damage dealers or at times even a really good support specialist. Limited is common for many damaging thrown grenades. For weapons with this rule, they can only be used once per game per operative that has them. Weapons with blast and the like will still make subsequent attacks after the first in sequence, but they exist as a one-off. In match play, weapons that have indirect as a rule can only be chosen from the equipment pool once, and if there is a version of it already on the field, pre-equipped to an operative, that one counts against total selection. The operatives will claim they are equipped with them in their ability descriptions, like the Hearthkin Grenadier or Assault Intercessor Grenadier. You can thank some of the Season 1 teams for this, as most of them would just crack grenade spam their way to victory. Mortal Wounds, another big element from the damage side of Kill Team, and the Mortal Wounds X rule can be found on very elite ranged weaponry on the field. Mortal Wounds represents damage that is applied past any saves that could be made. Only unique abilities that allow a sort of feel no pain roll can counter them. These wounds are triggered by critical dice retention during the shooting action. Just a heads up, the retention occurs before defense dice, so if the target has the ability to force dice discards or change results after retention, the mortal wounds will still be applied. Look out for weapons that carry this rule. Sometimes these come with large base damage, with an excess of mortal wounds attached on crit. In some horrifying situations, these weapons come with the lethal rule, or even find their way into the hands of specialists that can manipulate dice rolls in some way. For some teams, they exist as the fulcrum for their potential victory. Yet another weapon rule that carries with it the risk of being targeted by basically everything on your opponent's team to try to bring you down. No cover might be a little deceptive at first glance for new players. The Reddit threads on the Vox asking if this overrides line of sight against units in cover and conceal. Sadly, no. But this isn't a weak ability to have on a weapon. Simply put, enemies being shot at with this weapon are unable to retain their cover-based normal save. If a unit gains further benefit for being in cover, those can still occur, but retained dice from that state of being must be rolled. This rule can be extremely devastating for low armor save, low health horde units, as they tend to rely almost exclusively on the retained dice. It's just hard rolling 5s and 6s to prevent damage. Psychic action is a blanket term for a type of action that can be taken. Only some specialists have this kind of ability, and they range from attacks to buffs and debuffs, as well as mobility options. Really just a multi-tool of possibilities depending on team chosen. Key to note here that abilities used by this action that count as shooting are actually unaffected by exterior negatives. An injured Warp Coven Sorcerer will still be allowed to fire off a Flux Blast with the regular 3+ to hit, as it is technically not equipped with this as a weapon. In a similar fashion, the Sorcerer in Spec Ops can't purchase a weapon upgrade and equip it to the spell. There's a layer of interactions in Kill Team around these psychic abilities that exclusively interact with each other. Pay attention to these, as going against a devastating sorcerer could be easily alleviated if your team has gear specifically aimed at preventing many of their benefits, usually an Invulnerable Save against Psychic or a Feel No Pain. They might seem minor, but they could make your life a lot easier. PX, the little sibling of the APX rule. Where APX is always applied, PX only occurs when a critical is retained in shooting. This is actually treated as a gaining of the APX rule in that situation, so if you somehow have APX and PX on a weapon, those two won't stack. You can simply pick which to use, although I haven't seen this combo on standard weapons. Similar rules apply with APX. This is mostly against units that have very good armor saves and you're looking to apply damage to them in efficient ways. You'll find that a lot of heavy bolters have this for the Space Marine type units. In melee, mortal wounds aren't exactly a thing as there are no armor saves, but Reap X brings some mortal wound options to spread around. Simply put, if a critical is struck with the fighting action, the target and the attacker create a 1-inch aura around themselves, and all enemy units within that range take an amount of mortal wounds marked by the number after the Reap rule. This does not include the targeted enemy that took the critical hit. These critical hits must be used to strike. Parries will not trigger the effect. A decent way to give a melee-heavy team some benefits against horde teams. Also a good way to try to limit multiple enemies from trying to get into combat with a single unit. The benefit of assisted melee might be outweighed pretty greatly by the fear of taking a bunch of mortal wounds on multiple targets. Of all the reroll abilities on this list, Relentless is the pinnacle. Not just one dice, not just one dice result, all dice. Every single dice used in a shooting or fighting action can be rerolled with this weapon ability. This is probably one of the more horrifying rules to see on an enemy model, and these rerolls are a great way to fish for critical rolls or simply recover from a bad attack roll, or possibly reroll a bunch of misses into more misses. The dice can be fickle like that. Rending is a big damage boost rule. In a series of attack dice that you roll, if a critical is retained, another normal hit dice can be upgraded to a crit. This isn't a cumulative thing. If you roll 2 crits and 2 hits, both those hits won't be upgraded by this rule. But no one is going to complain about getting an extra crit in that situation. Sadly, the upgraded dice must be a hit, so a crit and 3 misses might need an extra reroll to capitalize on the result. The range rule exists as a limit to some weapons. Grenades and pistols tend to come with a range 6 stat. This limits the distance the operative needs to be from its target in order to perform a shoot action. For those grenades and pistols we talked about, it translates as 6 inches. This is normally measured from the attacking operative's base edge to determine distance, and the angles from the kill zone surface to vantage point play into this range. As long as this distance passes slightly onto the target's base edge, it will be a valid attack. You might find it to be good practice to mark movement distance with dice and pre-measure shots before committing to anything. For the unit that wants to stay concealed, but also wants to put damage downfield, Silent allows for the shoot action to occur during conceal. Fairly simple. Remember, however, that the Overwatch action requires engage, so the sacrifice of a silent unit staying safe in conceal is that it might not be able to push some extra damage out later. Splash exists as the Enhanced Mortal Wounds X rule. Very similar function. Roll the shooting attack, any criticals retained trigger a number of mortal wounds equal to the assigned amount for the weapon's splash ability. But to make this a bit better, these mortals are applied to all targets within 2 inches of the source. Note, however, that I didn't say enemy targets. Allies can suffer the same damage as well. This rule can be quite wild at times. Like in the hands of a higher-tech Psychomancer. Splash is attached to Blast, and all targets that take the Blast attack can trigger further Splash crits. This ability also provides a lethal 5 rule when used in close quarters. so extremely scary in these halls. Stun, as a critical effect, causes some interesting outcomes, which vary between ranged and close. From ranged, rolling and retaining a critical will immediately place a reduction of 1 APL on the target. In melee, stun occurs as critical strikes are used to do damage. The first time this happens, the unit using the strike can remove 1 normal hit from the target unit. The second time, the unit will suffer a -1 to its APL. Remember that APL cannot normally be increased or decreased more than 1, so multi-stunning a target will probably serve no purpose. In most situations like that, try to spread the love around. Torrent is a bit of a more involved blast. Follow me on this. The number after the Torrent is the range it allows. Unlike Blast, it doesn't just make an aura around the target operative. Instead, the unit attacking has to create a sort of web using that measurement to all models it wishes to hit. So a flamethrower with a Torrent of 3 firing into these 3 units could easily hit this one in the middle. But the 2 nearby are tricky. Both must be within the 6-inch range of the flamethrower, as well as 3 inches of everyone involved. As they are spread out 2 inches from the core target on either side, only 1 unit on the wing can be chosen to take a volley of attacks, as they are each further than 3 inches from each other. This kind of shape is more conductive to Torrent use, but remember that the weapon's range also plays into these limits. Also, Torrent is the last of the 3 common rules that confer lethal 5 in close quarters, because AoE works all too well in tight spaces. Last on the list of the common rules is Unwieldy, for when a ranged weapon needs something more than heavy to restrict its formidable power. 2 things. Using a shoot action requires 1 more action point than normal. This will greatly limit some operatives' options during their actions to just shooting. On top of this, unwieldy weapons cannot be used in Overwatch. Just a massive restriction, but the stats on many of these weapons tend to be able to turn the tides of any fight. And all of these rules make up the common functions you will see in any round of Kill Team. There are of course team-specific rules, as I've already said, but knowing these rules will give you a bit better of an understanding on how the more elaborate rules work, as well as what might mingle well with certain teams. Meltaguns with their AP2 and high mortal wounds are scary, but they are truly horrifying in the hands of a Casterkin gunner that can control the outcome of its dice. Do anything from these rules strike you as interesting, or have you seen any of these rules get used in wild ways because of team abilities and mission types? Let us know in the comments below, and as a reminder, we have that Discord community in the description. Join up and continue the conversation over there if you'd like. As always, likes for the like god and subscribes for the subscribe throne. I am Kimmerix, and I'll see you in the next one.